Hi everyone, it's Ren here. Hope you're doing well, guys, and enjoying your Sunday. Before I begin my video, just to remind you quickly that I've written a book. If you're into Kafka, Dostoevsky, Camus, Hermann Hesse, and all these wonderful people, many of them INFJs, and you want to support a fellow INFJ, the links will be down below. At some point, I will stop to promote the book in a preliminary fashion because I've been doing it for a while now. And many of you have actually purchased it, which I'm very grateful for. And please, if you get the chance, if you have purchased the book and if you get the chance, drop a review on Amazon. That would be very helpful. So far, there are a few reviews, but it'd be great to have more. So I thank you for this. I just wanted to talk a little bit about this notion of confrontation and conflict avoidance, because I was discussing it with my girlfriend recently, and we came to some interesting conclusions. Conclusions that I had in mind for a while, but I was able to kind of verbalize them a bit more. The first thing that I would say is, I think that the way in which we relate to conflict and how we deal with it is very much function of our entire stack, but it does seem to me ultimately that the feeling function is the decisive one here. And in order to illustrate this, I will try to lightly compare the case of the INFJ with the case of the INTJ and the ENFJ in particular, and the INFP as well, right? INFJ, INFP, INTJ, ENFJ. And as you can imagine, as you can see already, this is a great opportunity to compare, FE and FI, but not just FE and FI, also looking at where FE and FI are located in the stack. So for the INFP, FI would be dominant. For the INFJ, FE would be auxiliary. For the ENFJ, FE would be dominant. And for the INTJ, FI would be tertiary. In fact, I could have used the example of the ISTJ as well for this video. The differences between the two do not matter that much. And before I sort of start exploring these comparisons, what I would say is that based on my exchanges with fellow INFJs, especially over the years on forums and in comments to my videos, I have come to realize that a lot of INFJs struggle a little bit with confrontation and conflict. Now, this might come from a notion, which is wrong in my opinion, that conflict is always bad. Of course, conflict sometimes is the least bad approach to resolving a problem. But more often I think that it comes from a conflict avoidance, the inability or the belief that there is somewhere an inability to deal with conflict. And I think that, a lot of INFJs pin that down to having strong FE. And what I want to say here is that I don't think that's the case. In fact, I think that, this difficulty with dealing with conflict, it doesn't come from like an overdeveloped, so to speak, FE at the expense of TI, for instance. I think where it comes from is actually a slightly underdeveloped FE, or at least parts of FE are not fully harnessed. Because FE is not a function that has as one of its consequences that you are conflict avoidant because you want to please everyone. Like the healthy FE is it's not a function that leads you to be in a state of mind where you want to please everyone so much that you are afraid of entering into any possible conflict. I think that's a healthy FE. What healthy FE does is to give you a very good sense of what you can get away with, or what you can say and what you can do within a social conversation, social context, and what lies beyond the bounds of it, or what is likely going to push people's buttons a little bit. the stronger your FE, the more you will be aware of what you can do and what you cannot do. It's not a function that makes you afraid of conflict, makes you eager to please in and of itself. It's a function that tells you, like gives you a compass of where the social sort of conversation is evolving and in what direction. And so you can kind of steer the conversation with the help of that compass. So if you're an INFJ, for example, and you feel that you're conflict avoidant and you have real difficulty with dealing with conflicts, even when it might appear to be necessary, this is likely to be because your FE is a little bit unexploited in some respects. I'm not saying in all respects, but in some respects. And it's very possible, some INTPs, NE, can also be a little bit underdeveloped, making them look at times like ISTPs, and that applies to all types. The auxiliary function is not magically there and always healthy. It's wrong to think that that's the case. And as a result of having this slightly underdeveloped part of your FE, you might not be quite as well able to have that reliable compass. Instead, your compass is skewed toward expecting the worst, usually in conversations, and particularly in expecting that if you attempt to be direct, if you attempt to be forthright with an opinion and with something that you feel you should say, if you're afraid, it's probably because you envision that the person is not going to take it well, and perhaps they will hurt you back because they will be hurt. But this is in your mind, in a sense. This is what you anticipate because your FE is not giving you the full picture. And now this allows me to make a comparison with ENFJs, because you will notice ENFJs tend to be very forthright, very confident, not all the time, but more than INFJs on average. And they tend to be more direct, and you'll notice that, for all their strong, dominant FE, they are more direct usually than the INFJs. Like if FE was all about being soft and sort of like rounding the corners and wanting to please everyone, well, ENFJs would not be more direct, they would be less direct, but in fact for the vast majority of the time they're more direct, and that's good. That's a good way to be. But you'll notice that they are more direct, but it doesn't often ends up hurting people. Sometimes they enter into conflict in a job situation, a professional situation happens, and it works out. So why does it work out? Well, it works out because the ENFJ's dominant function is such that if the ENFJ is relatively healthy, they will have a very good, the best possible among all the types, with the ESFJ's sense of what they can do and what they cannot do, what they can say and what they cannot say or get away with, and what the costs of each social decisions are going to be, and so they can balance those different costs, compare them, and choose the best possible approach. And in many cases, their FE will tell them that they can go into conflict and that there will be peaceful resolution. And they're confident of that, they're confident that there will not be a backlash, and so they go for it, and it works. And in a sense, I think that the INFJ could take inspiration from that, look at how ENFJs operate, and try to see that way of operating is accessible to them as well. Their FE is only auxiliary, but if it's healthy, they can do the same, and it will lead them to assert themselves more, and to see that this resolves problems rather than create unnecessary problems. Now, in the case of INFPs and INTJs, the situation is different because they're FI users, and FI is a subjective function. So whether one is conflict avoidant or not doesn't depend as much on the assessment of a situation objectively, in terms of, or rather than objectively, I'd rather say externally, an external assessment of the situation with a little compass that tells them what they can do and cannot do. The FI is a subjective function, unlike FE. So usually what happens is that the decision to go for conflict depends on, if it's necessary, goes hand in hand with how the situation makes them feel and how they feel about it. Okay? So it's not so much about how they interpret the situation based on this external data, it's how they internally feel about it and what they sense from it. And because it is subjective in this sense, the reaction or the method, the approach to conflict or situations of stress will tend to be quite different. In the case of the INFP, you might have noticed some INFPs are quite conflict avoidant, but other INFPs in the workplace, you see that often, can actually be very assertive, more assertive than INFJs, and quite sure of themselves, at least they appear to be that way. And I think this is because because the FI is subjective and dominant, it will have a very strong influence on how the INFP engages those situations, but it will also heavily depend on the INFP's own individuality, their own person, and how they see things, how they feel things. For some INFPs, there will tend to be a lot of conflict avoidance, and for other INFPs, there will be a lot less conflict avoidance. And in both cases, the impact of the external context will not be usually as influential as it would be for INFJs and ENFJs. Now, in the case of INTJs, well, because their FI is tertiary and it comes after a thinking function, an external objective thinking function, it will be similar to the INFP, but even more pronounced in the sense that, or rather less pronounced in the sense that their FI subjectivity will be less influential on how they decide to approach things, and their method, their approach will be more influenced by their TE in this case. And what that means is that in practice, what you see, the INTJs tend to appear more decisive, more willing to engage in conflictual resolutions of problems and not be too afraid of what the repercussions might be. And I think this is for totally different reasons than the ENFJ. The ENFJ can do this and be direct because they know the social situation is well understood in advance, so they know how to proceed, whereas the INTJ has a subjective perception of the situation, which is less influential or not more influential on their decision making ultimately than their external thinking about the situation. Okay? And so this will also lead them to sometimes engage in conflict, which is a little bit more heated, and not be too ruffled by it. And so I'd love to know what your thoughts are on this, and if you agree with me on this interpretation. Let me know, and enjoy the rest of your Sunday. Bye-bye.